Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone's true character is exposed for all to see? When privilege and prejudice collide with dignity and grace. This is the story of how one man's ignorance led to an unforgettable lesson in humility at what should have been the happiest day of his life. If you believe in the power of transformation and second chances, stay with me until the end of this story. And if you think everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their appearance, consider subscribing to join our community of storytellers. The grand wedding of Nathan Parker and Emily Madison was the epitome of luxury and extravagance. Set in the sprawling gardens of the Rosebrook estate, every detail had been meticulously planned to perfection. Guests in designer attire sipped vintage champagne under cascading crystal chandeliers and strings of twinkling fairy lights, while the renowned Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra played soft, melodic tunes in the background. The gentle murmur of excited conversations filled the warm summer air as friends and family mingled, taking in the grandeur of the occasion. Nathan, the 25-year-old groom, commanded attention in his crisp white Tom Ford tuxedo. With his chiseled jawline and confident demeanor, he looked every bit the part of a man who had everything going for him. He basked in the compliments of friends and family, accepting their congratulations with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But beneath the charm and polished exterior, Nathan carried a sense of entitlement that often bordered on arrogance, a trait that would soon lead to his undoing. As Nathan moved through the crowd, joking with his groomsmen and greeting distant relatives, his attention shifted to the gold watch on his wrist. This wasn't just any timepiece. It was a cherished heirloom passed down through generations of Parker men, later customized to include his initials in delicate script. More than just a watch, it was a symbol of his family's legacy, wealth, and status, and Nathan rarely let it out of his sight. When the cocktail hour began, Nathan removed the watch momentarily while adjusting his cufflinks, placing it on the corner of an antique marble table near the 7-tier wedding cake. Distracted by a guest calling his name, he walked away, intending to retrieve it shortly. But when he returned a few moments later, the watch was gone. Nathan's heart skipped a beat as panic seized his chest. He scanned the table frantically, moving aside crystal champagne flutes and embroidered napkins with growing frustration. The watch, his prized possession, his family's legacy, had vanished into thin air. "Where is it?" he muttered to himself, his perfectly composed facade beginning to crack. His brow furrowed deeply as he called over his best man, James, and explained the situation in hushed, urgent tones. "Are you sure you left it here?" James asked, glancing around the crowded room with concern. "Of course I'm sure," Nathan snapped, his voice low but tense. "I put it right here. Someone must have taken it." Nathan's eyes darted across the room, landing on Marcus Williams, a tall, poised black man standing near the buffet table. Marcus, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit and polished Salvatore Ferragamo shoes, carried himself with quiet confidence as he scanned the room, holding a glass of water and speaking softly with another guest Nathan didn't recognize. The sight of this unfamiliar face at his exclusive wedding only fueled Nathan's suspicions. James hesitated, sensing where Nathan's mind was headed. "Nathan, don't jump to conclusions," he warned. "It could have been misplaced." But Nathan wasn't listening. Anger and deep-seated prejudice clouded his judgment. "I don't know who he is," Nathan muttered, narrowing his eyes at Marcus. "He doesn't look like he belongs here. I bet he knows something about this." If you believe in standing up against prejudice and discrimination, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories that matter. "Nathan, calm down," James urged, glancing nervously at the guests around them. But Nathan had already made up his mind. With determined steps, he strode across the room, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. The lively conversations around him began to quiet as people noticed his determined expression, the tension in his jaw, the darkness in his eyes. By the time he reached Marcus, several guests were already watching, their curiosity piqued by Nathan's purposeful approach. "You there?" Nathan called out, his tone sharp and accusatory, dripping with unmasked disdain. Marcus turned toward him, his expression calm but questioning. Yes, he replied politely, meeting Nathan's hostile gaze with dignity. Did you see a gold watch on that table over there? Nathan demanded, pointing toward the spot near the cake. His voice carried across the now quieting room, drawing more attention to the unfolding confrontation. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his voice steady and measured. No, I didn't. Nathan crossed his arms, his voice growing louder with each word. Really? Because it's funny how it disappeared, and you're the only person here I don't know. Are you sure you don't know anything about it? Marcus's expression remained calm, though a flicker of controlled anger crossed his face. I'm certain I haven't touched your watch. The room fell silent as more guests turned to watch the scene unfold. Emily, standing nearby with her bridesmaids, froze in disbelief. Nathan, what are you doing? She whispered, hurrying to his side. But Nathan ignored her, his frustration boiling over into something ugly and raw. You're saying you didn't see it, but how do I know you're telling the truth? Nathan's voice dripped with venom. People like you always think they can get away with things. The words landed like a slap in the face, their meaning unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the orchestra's music came to an abrupt halt, leaving only the sound of shocked whispers echoing through the grand hall. Marcus's calm demeanor faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure, years of dealing with prejudice evident in his measured response. People like me? He repeated, his voice quieter now but tinged with carefully restrained anger. What exactly do you mean by that, Nathan? Nathan shrugged, his arrogance unchecked, his privilege a shield he wielded without thought. You know exactly what I mean, he spat. You don't belong here. This isn't your kind of crowd. If you believe in calling out racism and standing up for what's right, join our community by subscribing. Together, we can make a difference. Marcus took a step closer, his towering 6 feet 3 inches frame intimidating but not aggressive. The Harvard MBA ring on his finger caught the light as he adjusted his Cartier cufflinks, subtle symbols of success that Nathan had been too blinded by prejudice to notice. I would suggest you rethink your words, Marcus said quietly, his voice firm. Not for my sake, but for your own. Nathan! Stop it! Emily hissed, tugging at his arm, her white Vera Wang gown rustling with the movement. You're embarrassing yourself and everyone here. Her eyes darted apologetically to their guests, many of whom were now recording the scene on their phones. Nathan shrugged her off, his voice rising to fill the cavernous space of the Rosebrook Estate's grand ballroom. Someone has to say it, Emily. He can't just walk in here and act like he's better than the rest of us. Marcus stared at him, his face a mask of controlled anger. He took a deep breath, refusing to let Nathan's words provoke him further. 20 years of building one of the most successful investment firms in the country had taught him the value of composure in the face of ignorance. I have nothing to prove to you, he said simply. Before Nathan could respond, another voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. Nathan Alexander Parker. That's enough. The authoritative tone belonged to Alexander Parker, Nathan's father, a tall, imposing man in his late 50s whose very presence commanded respect. The chairman of Parker Industries pushed through the crowd, his face a mixture of anger and devastating disappointment. Dad, Nathan began, but Alexander silenced him with a sharp wave of his hand, his platinum wedding band catching the light from the crystal chandeliers above. Not another word, Alexander said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of years of reputation built and nearly lost. He turned to Marcus, his expression softening with respect and gratitude. Mr. Williams, I am so deeply sorry for my son's behavior. I had no idea this would happen. Marcus nodded, his calm exterior returning. Apology accepted, Mr. Parker. But perhaps your son should be the one apologizing. Alexander turned back to Nathan, his voice cold enough to freeze the summer air. Do you even know who this man is? Nathan hesitated, his confidence crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. No, but This is Marcus Williams, Alexander said, his voice rising slightly as he gestured to the man his son had just insulted. Founder and CEO of Williams Global Ventures, one of the most successful investment firms in the country. The man who saved our company when we were on the brink of financial ruin during the 2008 crisis. Nathan's jaw dropped, his face turning a shade paler than his white tuxedo. The weight of his actions began to sink in as the murmurs of the guests grew louder, their whispers a chorus of shock and disapproval. "Wait! What?" Nathan stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Alexander continued, his tone sharp enough to cut diamond. 15 years ago, when every bank in the country turned us down, when we were weeks away from bankruptcy, when your private school tuition and our family home were about to disappear, Mr. Williams believed in me and loaned Parker Industries the funds we desperately needed. Without him, we wouldn't have what we have today. Without him, this lavish wedding you're so proud of wouldn't even be possible. If you believe in the importance of learning from our mistakes and growing as individuals, subscribe to hear more stories that challenge our perspectives. Nathan's head hung low as his father's words echoed through the room. For the first time in his privileged life, he realized the depth of his mistake. The entire crowd stood frozen in stunned silence, their attention fixed on the tense standoff between Nathan, his father Alexander, and Marcus Williams. The weight of Alexander's revelation hung in the air like storm clouds before a deluge. The once confident groom now stood speechless, his arrogance crumbling under the crushing weight of reality. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, searching for words, explanations, anything to justify his behavior. But nothing came out. The gravity of his mistake began to settle in, and the realization that Marcus Williams, the man he had so casually humiliated, was not just a guest but the very foundation of his family's current success made his cheeks burn with shame. "You're saying he helped us?" Nathan finally managed to stammer, his voice shaky and uncertain. "Him?" Alexander's jaw tightened, his disappointment palpable in every word. "Yes, Nathan. Marcus Williams is the reason this wedding is even happening today. Without his help years ago, this family wouldn't have been able to afford anything, let alone this grand celebration at Rosebrook Estate." Alexander turned to address the gathering crowd, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Some of you may not know this, but there was a time when Parker Industries was on the verge of collapse. We had taken risks that didn't pay off and no bank would touch us. I was desperate and ashamed, thinking I had failed my family." He paused, his voice thick with memory. "That's when I met Marcus Williams. He had just started Williams Global Ventures, and despite barely knowing me, he saw something in our company that others had missed. He believed in my vision when no one else would. The loan he provided saved not just our business, but our family's legacy." The guests murmured amongst themselves, shocked by the story. Eyes shifted back to Marcus, who stood silent and composed, his expression unreadable. Emily looked at him with newfound respect, while Nathan seemed to shrink under the weight of everyone's gaze. "Dad," Nathan began weakly, his voice barely audible in the hushed room. "I didn't know." "That's the problem, Nathan," Alexander snapped, his voice firm but laced with disappointment. "You didn't know, and yet you assumed. You accused a man, an honored guest, of stealing, without any evidence. And worse, you let prejudice guide your actions. Do you have any idea how disgraceful that is? How much damage you've done to our family's reputation in a single moment of ignorance?" Nathan looked down at his Italian leather shoes, unable to meet his father's eyes. The guilt was overwhelming, but Alexander Parker wasn't finished. His father's words had stripped away every layer of privilege and pretense, leaving Nathan exposed before the gathering of over 300 guests at Rosebrook Estate. If you believe in the power of moments that change us forever, subscribe to hear more stories that challenge our perspectives and open our hearts. Marcus Williams, who had remained quiet throughout Alexander's speech, finally spoke. His voice was calm but commanding enough to silence the crowd. "Mr. Parker," he said, addressing Alexander while maintaining his characteristic poise, "while I appreciate your words, I think it's important that Nathan hears this from me as well." Alexander stepped aside, his respect for Marcus evident as he gestured for him to continue. All eyes were now on Marcus as he turned to Nathan, his piercing gaze unwavering. Nathan felt the full weight of Marcus's presence, his success, his dignity, his unshakable composure in the face of prejudice. It was a presence that made Nathan feel smaller than he had ever felt in his 25 years of privileged existence. "Nathan," Marcus began, his voice steady and deliberate, carrying the wisdom of a man who had overcome countless obstacles to build an empire. "I understand that emotions can run high in situations like this. Losing something valuable can make anyone upset. But the way you chose to handle this situation wasn't just inappropriate. It was a reflection of something far deeper and more troubling." Nathan flinched, but Marcus continued, his words measured and precise. "You didn't know who I was, and yet you felt entitled to humiliate me in front of everyone here. You assumed the worst about me because of how I look, and you let your prejudice dictate your actions. Do you understand the weight of what you've done?" Nathan nodded slightly, but Marcus wasn't finished. "This isn't about the watch," he continued, echoing Alexander's earlier words. "This is about character. It's about the way we treat people, especially those we think are different from us. What you did tonight says more about you than it could ever say about me." The crowd remained silent, hanging on Marcus's every word. Even the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra had set aside their instruments, their sheet music forgotten as they watched the scene unfold. "But I'm not here to humiliate you, Nathan," Marcus said, his tone softening slightly. "I'm here to teach you something. Life will present you with opportunities to rise above your own ignorance and grow. This is one of those moments. The question is, will you learn from it, or will you continue down the path you're on?" Nathan finally looked up, his eyes filled with shame and regret. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry." Marcus nodded, but remained serious. "Words are a start, Nathan, but actions matter more. If you truly mean it, then show it, and not just to me, but to everyone you meet. Let this moment change you for the better." Nathan's father stepped forward, his voice firm but supportive. "Nathan, this is your chance to do the right thing. Apologize properly and learn from this mistake. I won't tolerate this kind of behavior in our family." Nathan took a deep breath, gathering what courage he could. He turned to Marcus, his voice trembling but sincere. "Mr. Williams, I can't express how sorry I am for what I said and did tonight. It was wrong, and there's no excuse for it. I've been arrogant and blind to my own ignorance, but I promise you, I'll do everything I can to change." Marcus studied Nathan for a moment, then extended his hand. "Apology accepted," he said simply, shaking Nathan's hand firmly. The crowd erupted into a mix of applause and relieved murmurs, the tension in the room beginning to dissipate, replaced by a sense of hope and reconciliation. If you believe that true change comes from acknowledging our mistakes and working to be better, subscribe to join our community of storytellers who share these powerful moments of transformation. Emily stepped forward, placing a hand on Nathan's arm and whispering, "Thank you for doing the right thing." Her eyes shone with a mixture of relief and pride, not for the man Nathan had been, but for the man he was choosing to become. Alexander turned to Marcus, his expression filled with gratitude. "Mr. Williams, I can't thank you enough for everything, not just for tonight, but for all you've done for our family. I'm deeply sorry for my son's behavior, and I promise you, he will learn from this." Marcus smiled faintly, his composure never wavering. "Don't thank me, Mr. Parker. Your kindness to me in the past has always mattered. I just hope you'll ensure that your son grows into a man who values that same kindness and respect." The wedding ceremony eventually resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations were more reflective, and guests who might have judged Marcus earlier now regarded him with admiration. Nathan remained quiet for much of the evening, humbled by the experience but determined to make amends, not just to Marcus, but to himself. In the months that followed, Nathan embarked on a journey of transformation that would reshape his entire worldview. He began by educating himself, reading books about systemic racism and privilege, attending seminars on racial equality, and seeking out mentors who could guide him toward a better understanding of the world beyond his privileged bubble. He started volunteering at the Williams Foundation, a nonprofit organization founded by Marcus that provided educational opportunities and business mentorship to underprivileged youth in Philadelphia. Through these experiences, Nathan gained a deeper understanding of the struggles others faced and realized how much he had taken for granted. 1 year after the wedding, Nathan found himself sitting across from Marcus at the same cafe where they had first discussed the possibility of Nathan volunteering at the foundation. The setting was humble, a far cry from the grandeur of Rosebrook Estate, but it felt right. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Williams," Nathan said, his demeanor noticeably more humble and thoughtful. "I wanted to thank you not just for forgiving me that night, but for changing my life. Your grace showed me what true strength and dignity look like. This past year, working with the foundation, seeing the impact we can have when we lift others up instead of tearing them down. It's opened my eyes in ways I never thought possible." Marcus nodded, studying the young man before him. "I'm proud of the work you've done, Nathan. But remember, this journey doesn't end here. Keep challenging yourself and, more importantly, help others along the way." 3 years later, at the annual Parker Industries Charity Gala, Alexander Parker raised a toast, his voice filled with pride and emotion. "To Marcus Williams," he said, addressing the crowd, "the man who not only saved my business but helped my son become the man he was meant to be. Thank you for showing us all what true kindness and strength look like." Marcus smiled and raised his glass, his eyes meeting Nathan's across the room. In that moment, no words were needed. Their journey, though born from conflict, had become a story of redemption, growth, and the unshakable power of grace. The gold watch that had sparked the confrontation was eventually found beneath a napkin on the wedding day, but its temporary loss had led to something far more valuable, a profound transformation that would impact generations to come. Nathan's story became a testament to the power of humility, education, and the willingness to change. If you believe that even our darkest moments can lead to our greatest growth, subscribe to our channel. Together, we can share more stories that remind us of our capacity to learn, grow, and become better versions of ourselves. Marcus Williams continued his philanthropic work, expanding the Williams Foundation's reach across the country. He never sought recognition, but his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. And Nathan? He became a living example of how one moment of confrontation, handled with grace and wisdom, could spark a lifetime of positive change. Years later, when asked about that fateful night at Rosebrook Estate, Marcus would simply smile and say, "Sometimes our greatest mistakes can lead to our most important lessons. It's not about the fall. It's about how we choose to rise."